everyone, this is Showtime 112. It's June the 7th, 1982, and it's day one of a conflict which is usually known as 1982 Lebanon War. Of course, the Lebanon Civil War began more than a decade before, but this was primarily a conventional conflict between Israel and Syria, which took place in the territory and airspace of Lebanon. The whole thing kicked off with an Israeli ground invasion whose objective was to create a buffer zone in the south of the country and essentially push the PLO away from Israeli borders and to deny them ability to launch attacks against north of Israel. Syria, on the other hand, deployed their conventional forces to Lebanon to protect their Palestinian allies and also to maintain influence over the country. In order to protect their forces from Israeli airstrikes, they also deployed their integrated air defense system, which was based on Soviet-built surface-to-air missiles. Syrians assumed that if the system worked well in 1973, it should also work well in 1982. But this was a classic mistake of fighting the last war, because now Israel had a solution, and the integrated air defense system ended up being completely destroyed. But this is all still in the future at this point. It's early afternoon of the first day, and the Syrian integrated air defense system is still intact. Israeli aircraft are flying strike missions into Lebanon, and of course they're being protected by fighters, primarily F-15s flying combat air patrol missions. And to stay away from missile engagement zone, they're basically orbiting over water south of Beirut, and they only go feet dry when necessary. We're joining one such flight consisting of 4 F-15s. Just because the Syrians relied mostly on surface-to-air missiles doesn't mean that their fighters were being inactive. And our group of Eagles in fact detected several Syrian fighters on their own radars, and they also received some warnings from their ground control. At one point, one of the Syrian fighters approached Israeli strike aircraft, came way too close, and the Eagles were forced to intervene. and this was the first air-to-air kill of the 1982 Lebanon War. He was scored by a pilot named Offer Lapidot, and he would also score the last kill of the war for his squadron several days later. The encounter was pretty much typical of this conflict. There wasn't any real dogfight going on. Israelis would usually detect the Syrians first. They would then attack by Sparrow missiles, and if those failed, they would then press on and attack with infrared homing missiles, and in a couple of occasions with guns. The whole thing, as you probably know, ended up in a complete defeat of Syrian Air Force. What were the factors contributing to this? Well, partly the fact that they were flying inferior, older technology aircraft, but some Israeli pilots suggest in their interviews that it was also their tactics that was quite poor and completely inferior to anything that Syrians demonstrated in 1973. It can also be noted that Syrian pilots generally had very poor situational awareness, which can be explained with inferior radars and lack of radar warning receivers, but also with failure of Syrian GCI to provide a good picture to their fighter pilots. Why was that so? Perhaps they were jammed effectively by the Israelis, perhaps they were inexperienced. If you know anything more about this, you can contribute in the comment sections. Also, the Sparrow missile apparently, even though it was improved significantly over the models used in the Vietnam War, its effectiveness was still very, very far from what was initially expected of it in the late 50s and early 60s, when it was believed that fighters could rely on missiles only, and whoever detected the enemy first and launched their missiles first would be the winner. If you like this video, don't forget to press the like button, that's very important for the channel. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. If you're able to, you can support the channel on Patreon, which would be extremely helpful. Feel free to comment, share, subscribe if you haven't else already, and keep watching Showtime 112.